सदागमैकविज्ञेयं समतीतक्षरा अक्षरं नारायणं सदा वन्दे निर्दोषाशेषसद्गुरम् श्रीमन्मध्वमते हरिपरतरः सत्यं जगत् तत्त्वतो वेदः जीवगणाः हरेरनुचराः नीचोच्चभावं गताः मुक्तिः नैजसुखा अनुभूतिः अमला भक्तिश्च तत्साधनम् ह्यक्षादित्रतयं प्रमाणम् अखिल आम्नायैकवेद्यो हरिः. Good afternoon, everyone. I would first like to offer my respects to Sri Prabhanjanachar for giving me this opportunity to be here. It's indeed a privilege to deliver a lecture on Madhva philosophy and health in today's workshop. Over the next 40 minutes or so, I would like to share my thoughts on this broad and challenging subject. Madhvacharya defines philosophy as tattva nirnaya, determination of things as they are in themselves. For such a determination, experience or anubhava is critical for Madhva. Philosophy not based on experience is useless. An experience not informed by philosophy is blind. More importantly, philosophy that goes against experience is bad philosophy, or indeed it's no philosophy at all. So experience is the solid foundation on which philosophical structures should be built on. So we experience suffering, we experience ill health, we experience health, and we experience happiness. So any philosophy worth its salt should be able to provide a comprehensive explanation for our state of affairs. Madhva's philosophy is the most comprehensive shastra that addresses all these issues. As a practicing physician, I see people experiencing ill health and suffering all around me. So I am acutely aware of what we humans seek the most and cherish the most, which is good health and happiness in our life. So what is health? The World Health Organization defines health as a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely an absence of disease or infirmity. Advances in science and technology and medicine has improved the lifespans of human beings. We are living longer than ever before. For example, the average life expectancy of an Indian is currently around 68 years. In the 1960s, it was 40 years. So we Indians are definitely living longer. But in the process of living longer, we have also created and generated a lot of new diseases, stress-related illness, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, cancer. A cancer epidemic is currently brewing in India, largely contributed by smoking, alcohol, pollution, poor appetite, lack of exercise, and so on. So despite all the comforts around us, we seem to be suffering more and more. happiness just doesn't seem to be in our grasp. Why is this the case? In fact, how many of us even realize that we are suffering? How many of us even ask the question, why is there suffering? Or what is the origin of suffering? So without a deep understanding of what suffering is, there is actually no way of realizing true happiness and health. Jayatirtha gives a wonderful avatarika in Avatarika to Mayavada Kandana of Srimad Acharya. He says, Ihahi vividha samsarika dukkha darshanena viraktasya samadamadi mato mumukshoho adhikarinaha tannivruttayai paramananda avaptyai cha. And he goes on. So that person who, after experiencing or seeing suffering, understands the transitory nature of everything material, that person who understands that happiness comes and goes, miseries come and go, that person is said to have acquired vairagya. A person who has acquired vairagya is a mumukshu or an adhikarin, fit for philosophical inquiry into suffering and to find solutions for his problems. The first sutra, in fact the first sutra of Badarayana, states Om Om Atato Brahma Jignasa Om. This sutra can be split into Ata, Ataha and Brahma Jignasa. Atha in English would mean then. So the question one would ask is, what does then actually mean in this situation? Srimad Acharya clarifies, Ata Shabdo Mangalarto Adhikara Anantarya Artascha. So, a person who has vairagya and who is a mumukshu, so such a person who is a mumukshu becomes adhikarin. So once a person achieves eligibility or becomes an adhikarin, then therefore Brahma Jignasa. So we conclude that a critical reflection on suffering is a fundamental requirement before any progress can be made towards health and happiness. As you all know, Srimad Acharya has given us 37 works to study in our lives. These 37 works are called the Sarvamoola Granthas. There are 10 Prakarana Granthas called Dasa Prakaranas. They are Pramana Lakshana, Katha Lakshana, Tattva Sankyana, Tattva Viveka, Karma Nirnaya, Prapancha Mityatva Anumana Kandana, Mayavada Kandana, Upadhi Kandana, Tattvo Dyota, and Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya. So, in these 10 Prakarana Granthas, Srimad Acharya gives us the fundamental tenets of his philosophy. And in many places in these texts, he gives a critical analysis of suffering and he explains his doctrine of bondage and suffering. We do not have time to go into great detail about Acharya's doctrines, but it's called Swabhava Ajnanavada. I shall summarize a few salient points. Point number 1. Suffering is real. And it's real because it is in this world which is real. Satyam Jagat. If suffering is illusory or unreal, then there is no question of eliminating something that actually does not exist. There is no need for philosophical inquiry. Point number 2. The experiencer of suffering is the jiva, or the soul. If Jiva Brahma Aikya is accepted, then it amounts to saying that Brahman is suffering and is in samsara. This doesn't make sense. Point number 3. The origin of suffering, the cause of suffering is ajnana, also known as avidya or ignorance. So this ajnana or avidya is the original cause of suffering. So then the question arises, what is this ignorance about? What is this ignorance all about? Srimad Acharya states that the ignorance is about our essential nature as jivas, and also an ignorance about our relationship with the Supreme, the Bimba Pratibimba Bhava, as Acharya tells us. So in ignorance, we have forgotten our constitutional position, and we assume that we are an independent center of activity. And this is the original cause of suffering. So again, if Jiva Brahma Aikya is accepted, then it amounts to saying that it is the Brahman that has been covered by ignorance. Srimad Acharya in Upadhi Khandana, for example, asks a very formidable question. Ajnata akhila samvetuhu katate na kutaschana. If God is omniscient, if God is all-knowing, how can ignorance cover an all-knowing God? It is absurd. Either we give up the idea that God is omniscient, or we accept that ignorance is far powerful than God and that we worship ignorance. So the next question, as I said, is the ignorance of our own essential nature and our relationship to the Supreme. Srimad Acharya has told us, Swatantram Paratantram Chadvividam Tattvam Ishyate. In all of existence, there are only two entities. One independent supreme entity called God, Vishnu or Narayana, and all else, the infinite jivas and the jadas, which are dependent on the Supreme. So because of ignorance, when we forget this constitutional position of ours and assume ourselves to be centers of independent activity, that is the starting point of our suffering. This point has to be contemplated very deeply. So unless we understand our dependence on the Supreme, there is no way in which we are ever going to be able to solve the problem of suffering. Point number 4. This ignorance or ajnana is under the control of the divine will. Point number 5. If the lock of ignorance is under the divine will, then it also implies the key to open this lock is also under the control of the divine will. This is called divine grace. So divine grace in Madhva Shastra is absolutely essential for the removal of avidya and for salvation. So how do we get divine grace? In Brahma Sutra Bhashya, Srimad Acharya gives us the guidance. Yato Narayana Prasadambrutena Mokshaha Nacha Jnanam Vina Atyartha Prasadaha Ato Brahma Jignasa Kartavyaha. Madhva tells us that without God's grace, there is no salvation. Without the knowledge of God, there is no God's grace. Therefore, to acquire God's knowledge, we need to do Brahma Jignasa or learn the Shastras. So the first sutra of Badarayana, Om Om Atata Brahma Jignasa Om, and Acharya's Bhashya as Atha Shabdo Mangalarto Adhikara Anantarya Artascha Atah Shabdo Hetvartaha Brahma Shabdascha Vishnaveva is so pregnant with thought that Sri Jayatirtha actually invests pages in his Nyaya Sudha to expand this concept and help us understand the profound thoughts of Acharya. So far we have seen that a real suffering exists, and that this real suffering is because of ignorance, and that this ignorance needs to be removed. For removing this ignorance, we need God's grace. To receive God's grace, we need to have knowledge about God. So the next question is, how do we go about understanding the knowledge of God? A popular modern thinking, which allegedly is scientific, is that the presence of God cannot be proven by scientific experimentation. Therefore, this proves that God does not exist. In my view, this is the most unscientific of all explanations. Firstly, science can only explain the how or the what of things, but never the why of things. Number two, scientific methodology uses observations of material objects using instruments that are also material. So in most situations, the scientific methodology also uses inference based on observations and then comes up with a theory. So Madhva would say that the scientific methodology includes pratyaksha or observational knowledge and anumana or inferential knowledge. However, God is not material. He is not made of matter. So in this situation, how can a material instrument be used to detect a non-material substance? So Srimad Acharya in his Sutra Bhashya says that Pratyaksha is a upajivya pramana for material things, whereas scriptures are upajivya pramana for non-material things. This he elaborates in great depth in Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya, where he also establishes that the supreme source of God's knowledge, supreme source of knowledge about God, is the Vedas. The Vedas are unauthored, they are apaurushaya, and they are the most valid of scriptures that we have at our disposal. Now the problem here is, Vedas are vast, they are infinite, ananta vai vedaha. They are in archaic, ancient Sanskrit. Understanding the language of the Vedas is tough to say the least. So in this context, not many of us actually have access to the Vedas. So in this situation, how do we learn about God? Badarayana has given us a guide here. In his third sutra, he says, Om Shastra Yonitvat Om. He can be known only through the Shastras. So Srimad Acharya describes Shastras as Sadagamas. So what are Sadagamas? In Vishnu Tattva Nirnaya and Brahma Sutra Bhashya, he expands and tells us that Sadagamas are Rigadya, Bharatam Chaiva, Pancharatra Mata Akhilam, Mula Ramayanam Chaiva, Puranam Cha Etad Atmakam, Yeche Anuyayinash Tesham, Sarve Teja Sadagamaha. So the four Vedas, Rig, Yajush, Sama, and Atharvana, the four Vedas, Mahabharata, Pancharatragama, and the Mula Ramayana. These 7 form the core text. The Puranas that tally with these 7, they also form the Sadagamas. And any literature or any text that concurs with all the above that's mentioned, they all form Sadagamas. So now we realize that we can access many of the non-Vedic texts to know about God. Therefore, we understand that studying of Shastra is the first requirement which will give us a chance to eliminate suffering and move towards health and happiness. So how do we go about doing this? Brihadaranyaka Upanishad says, Atmava are drashtavyaha shrotavyo mantavyo nitidhyasitavya. Shrotavya means shravana, which means to read, to hear, to learn and to gain knowledge. Mantavyo means manana, which means to revise, to firm up our knowledge, to remove doubts, samshaya, to remove misapprehensions, viparyaya, and we firm up our knowledge about God. Then we do dhyana, nitidhyana, which is contemplation, meditation about the Supreme and all His attributes. So this process has been described in the Upanishads and also explained in great depth by Srimad Acharya. And he describes that these 3 routes are the only routes towards attaining salvation. Now, therefore, for us to do Shravana, Manana and Dhyana, we need a body as an instrument. We need to use our eyes, we need to use our hearing, we need to use our eyes to read, we need to use our hearing to hear the mantras. We need a pair of legs to walk to our Guru. We need hands to open our books, to write. We need a vocal cord and a tongue to recite the mantras. We need a brain that can remember these mantras and philosophical concepts. And we need a brain that is able to analytically process this information. We need a stable mind to be able to meditate and contemplate on the knowledge that has been gained. Therefore, every effort we make to achieve God realization, we need this body as an instrument. So understandably, any defects in any of these components of our bodies will affect our philosophical inquiry and progress. In Pramana Lakshana, Acharya defines Pratyaksha as Nirdosha Artha Indriya Sannikarasham Pratyaksham. So a contact between a defectless sense organ and a defectless sense object generates a knowledge which is valid, true knowledge. So if such were the situation for a pramana, then it is obvious that the sense organs that come in contact with the sense objects has to be optimally functioning. So healthy indriyas can operate only in a healthy body. In fact, in Kataka Upanishad, this concept has been explained with a beautiful analogy, comparing our body to a chariot. Shariram ratamevacha atmanam ratim viddihi buddhintu saratim viddihi manah pragraham evacha indriyan hayanahuhu vishayan teshu gocharan. So shariram evacha, shariram ratam evacha. So this body is the chariot. We could equate this to a car in the modern times. Atmanam ratim viddihi. So the Atma, the Jiva, is the passenger in this body. Buddhim tu sarathim viddihi. The intellect is the driver. Manaha pragraham evacha. The mind is the reins that controls the horse, or in modern situation we could say mind is equal to the steering wheel. Indriyan hayanahu. So the sense organs of the horses, the 5 horses of a chariot is equivalent to 5 sense organs. So in a modern car example, which includes the 4 wheels and a standby wheel that is there in the boot. So there are 5 wheels even in the modern car. Vishayanteshu gocharan. So this horse races towards its objects. In the modern parlance, this car races towards the cinema theatre or restaurant or clubs. So in this analogy, it is entirely up to us to decide what destination that we would want to take. We can control our intellect, thereby control our mind, thereby control our sense organs, thereby control our destination. And we can control in 2 ways. Either we can take an approach towards enjoying temporary material happiness and pleasures, and Kataka says that this is the preyas way of life, or we can decide to take a destination towards God realization, eternal happiness and health. That is the Shreyas. So this decision as to whether we would want to take an approach towards prayers or Shreyas is entirely up to us. Just for the sake of argument, let us assume that we have taken the direction of Shreyas. So for us to reach our destination towards Shreyas, we need this chariot. Now every component of this chariot needs to be functioning optimally for us to reach our destination. If the wheels are broken, the chariot is not going to go anywhere. If the intellect cannot control the mind, the horse is going to go astray. If the mind cannot control the indriyas are going to go astray. If the indriyas are not controlled properly, then they go erratically towards various sense objects. So, this analogy instantly reminds us of the need for a healthy vehicle, a body, for us to reach our destination or higher purpose. However, in the current scheme of things, in the current scheme of modern living, we have definitely lost this purpose. We have definitely lost our sense of purpose. Let us assume that we live for about 75 years. The first 25 years is gone in play, school, university, finding a job. The second 25 years is gone in marriage, children, and a career. The third 25 years is gone in grandchildren, family commitments, and then illnesses finally catch up with us, and then we are finished. Also, please note, 50% of the 75 years is actually lost in sleep. So, where is the time? Our time with a healthy body is very limited. In Sankhya Yoga, Krishna reminds us in the Gita, in several verses, that the decay of the material body is inevitable. Vasamsi jirnani yata vihaya navani grhnati naroparani tata sharirani vihaya jirnani anyani samyati navani dehi. Just as a new shirt eventually gets dirty, gets old, gets worn out, and then eventually it has to be thrown and another new shirt has to be worn. Similarly, we take birth, we go through youth, then the body wears off, then we become old, then we get disease, and then finally we perish, and then we acquire a new body. So in this process, we have very little control of this process. However, what we can do with our limited free will is to look after this body as much as possible so that we can perform our sadhanas for a brighter future. In chapter 15 of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna reminds us that there are two types of living beings. Dva imau purushau loke kshara akshara evacha. So we are kshara purushas. Ksharira ksharanat ksharaha. What that means, that we are kshara purushas in the sense that we own a body that gets destroyed. So the brief period that we reside in this body, we need to look after this body very well. Madhva Shastra and Madhva way of life is a wonderful tool to maintain a healthy body and a stable mind. A balanced vegetarian diet is the Madhva way of life. This instantly reduces our risk of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and increases our longevity. Dietary restrictions such as Ekadasi and various vratas tone up the body and discipline the mind. Avoiding a spicy diet helps to maintain a steady mind. Sri Prapanjanacharya's lecture today on benefits of Sandhya Vandana and Tulasi Puja is very relevant for today's talk. Memorizing and reciting the Gita, Vayustuti, Brahma Sutras, Purusha Shukta, Dvadasa Shostra, and so on certainly increases brain power. An active brain is promoted in Madhva way of life. This of course reduces the risk of dementia and memory loss. Yoga and meditation stabilizes the mind. In fact, Srimad Acharya himself led by example. In Madhva Vijaya, we learn about several superhuman feats performed by Acharya. It is a testimony to his physical strength and mental agility. Madhva Shastra instructs us that a healthy body is a means to an end and not an end in itself. So what should be our real end? Our aim should be that we become a Sthita Prajna and a Muni, as Krishna reminds us in Sankhya Yoga verse 55 and 56. Prachahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atmanyeva atmana tishtaha sthita prajnasya tada uchyate. Dukkeshu anudvigna manaha sukeshu vigataspruhaha vitaraga bhayakrodaha stitadir muniruchyate. So in every day of our life, we should strive to be a Sthita Prajna and a Muni as instructed by Krishna. So in conclusion, just as a critical analysis of suffering and ill health is the starting point of our philosophical journey, a healthy body and mind is absolutely essential for us to successfully make that philosophical journey. When our journey reaches the God's abode, there we enjoy eternal health and happiness in the company of the Supreme. This in essence is the aim and scope of Madhva philosophy. I would like to stop there, and again I would like to thank Sri Prapanjanacharya for giving me this opportunity. Krishna Pranamastu.